when they all need something to calm the mind. You've got your needlework. Connor's got his rat's tail. It's all happening.
Poetry, actually.
Yeah, poetry. Can you email me one for Wednesday, please? That's the plan.
I'll see.
RNZ National. Connor English, Sue Kesley. Thanks for being with me. Lisa Owen, Checkpoint next. I'm back tomorrow, 3:45. See you then.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Yeah, Heidi Akine, drive-by shootings and all-out brawls on the streets in Northland and Auckland. Have gangs got the upper hand on police? Commissioner Andrew Costa joins us live. The government moves to bust up the supermarket duopoly, but stops short of forcing them to sell off assets. So are your groceries actually going to get cheaper? We'll ask the Consumer Affairs Minister, who is joining us live. US President Joe Biden consoles the community grieving after a mass shooting and promises to do something. It's another weather walloping for some parts of the country, and the famous Kaimanawa horses are given birth control to keep herd numbers in check. Now don't forget, you can catch us live on Facebook, Freeview Channel 50 and of course Sky Channel 83.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Marie, I'm Evie Ashton. New Zealanders are being told they'll soon pay fairer prices for their groceries. The government is establishing a grocery sector watchdog and a mandatory code of conduct as it tries to tackle the supermarket duopoly. It will also force supermarkets to open up their wholesale arms to would-be competitors if they haven't already done so by the end of the year. The Consumer Affairs Minister, David Clark, says the changes will bring down the cost of food.
There's no doubt that having a competitive market has altered the landscape in Australia, and not arguing that Australia is the most competitive in the world, but we know that having bigger players come into their market has changed the landscape. We could expect, if we improve competition here, that consumers will pay a fairer price at the checkout.
David Clark says change must happen fast. A virtual meeting between China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi and his counterparts from Pacific nations has just ended in Suva. Only members of the Chinese and Fijian delegations were present in person for the discussion about a development vision for Pacific Islands countries. RNZ Pacific's Life Movono is at the Grand Pacific Hotel in Suva, where a joint media conference is about to start with Mr Wang and Fiji's Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama.
It's heavily secure, very tight, and all journalists have been instructed they can't move, they can't ask questions, they're not to get up close to either the Prime Minister of Fiji or Wang Yi, and they're not to follow them out of the room when the announcements have been over.
Life Movono says the details of the partnership agreement between China and Fiji are expected to be released after Mr Wang and Mr Bainimarama have spoken to media. Christchurch City Council is scrambling on its first day, providing financial support for residents gagging over the stench of a broken wastewater plant. The council agreed last week to grant $200 to households in Bromley to recognise costs they're incurring by managing the smell in their homes. Residents could collect the payment from 4 different community hubs from this morning, but the council has already run out of Prezi cards. More have been ordered, but won't arrive until the end of the week. The fund is still available to directly pay power bills. Contractors have been clearing debris from roads in Coromandel walloped by storms today. Parts of the peninsula were soaked with 100 millimetres of rainfall before lunchtime. Thames Coromandel Civil Defence Controller Gary Towler says there have been slips along the coastal roads. One was closed. And with more rain forecast in the coming days, he's expecting further damage until at least Thursday. Crews have also been clearing branches on roading in Northland. The government has sought assurances Television New Zealand followed due process when recruiting Kamal Santamaria. TVNZ won't answer questions about the sudden resignation of Mr Santamaria, who quit less than a month after starting as a breakfast presenter. Acting Prime Minister Grant Robertson says the Broadcasting Minister Chris Farfoy has made inquiries with TVNZ's board.
The government has expectations on Television New Zealand as a state-owned company that they will follow the right processes when it comes to recruitment, and I know that Minister Farfoy has sought an assurance from the TVNZ board that the right processes were followed in this case.
Grant Robertson says Chris Farfoy is still awaiting a response. And the New Zealand Sevens tournament is returning to Hamilton after a 2-year hiatus from the Waikato city. Co-promoter Dallas Fisher says the tournament will be hosted on the new dates of January the 21st and 22nd of next year. He says the event brings $3.2 million to the local economy and a further $2 million is spent on the event itself. The Black Ferns and All Black Sevens are set to defend their respective titles. In other sports news, Hamilton golfer Stephen Elka's golden run on the US Championship Tour has continued with victory in the PGA Championship, one of the majors on the senior tour. Elka, who started the final round 4 shots off the lead, won by 3 to claim his 3rd victory of the year.
Just everybody, my trainer, swing coaches, putting coaches, obviously the support of my family. That's been the biggest, my wife and kids, that's huge.
A drive-through penalty for speeding in the pits has cost Scott Dixon victory at the Indy 500. Dixon was leading with 25 laps to go when he was penalised. He eventually finished 21st, while fellow New Zealander Scott McLaughlin crashed. The race was won by Sweden's Marcus Ericsson. The Black Caps insist their heavy loss... Oh, this is a news story, sorry about that. The Black Caps insist their heavy loss to a county selection will set them up well for the opening test against England. New Zealand lost by 7 wickets after being rolled for just 148 in their second innings. The Black Caps used 19 players in the match, and Matt Henry believes the game was particularly useful for the bowlers.
Be able to have such a strong side to play against out here and get through the loads with his bowlers. I think we went through about 18 players, so that was really good to have the guys be able to get through some workloads and to prepare us for this first test.
The first test at Lord's starts on Thursday. And Nottingham Forest will return to English football's the Premier League after beating Huddersfield Town 1-0 in the Championship playoff final. That's the news.
French police fire tear gas on football fans.
UEFA and the police is an absolute disgrace, indiscriminately pepper spraying people queuing up with tickets.
Heartbreak for New Zealanders in the Indy 500.
Scott Dixon got caught for speeding.
And Scott Dixon says, come on, are you serious?
And there goes Felix Rosenquist to the front of the field.
And Super Rugby Pacific reaches the knockout stage.
The Blues finishing on top, and deservedly so. They'll be hosting the Highlanders, who've rather limped into these playoffs, been a little bit of a laughing matter.
Your sports news covered. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint with Lisa Owen next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. For Northland and Auckland, showers with thunderstorms and hail possible, clearing this evening. Rain developing tomorrow evening with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms in Northland. From Waikato to Taranaki, including Taumarunui, also Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Rain with thunderstorms, hail and localised downpours possible, turning to showers tonight and clearing tomorrow afternoon. Rain developing tomorrow night. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, occasional rain clearing tonight, fine tomorrow. From Whanganui to Wellington, including Taihape, Wairarapa, Marlborough and Nelson. Periods of rain turning to showers this evening but becoming fine about the Kaikoura coast. Showers clearing from Wellington northwards tomorrow and rain developing elsewhere at night. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain heavy at times, easing to a few showers for a time tomorrow. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, areas of low cloud or fog about the coast clearing overnight. Scattered rain developing tomorrow night. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy, occasional rain tomorrow. It's 7 minutes past 5. We'll update you with the latest news headlines and traffic at 5:20.
Ngā mihi, Evie. A gang feud continues to spill over in Auckland and Northland with hundreds of rounds of ammunition and several firearms seized. There's been more than a dozen shooting incidents across multiple locations, stemming, it seems, from tensions between the tribesman gang and its former feeder, the Killer Bees. Last Friday, the Kaikoi community marched for peace and local hapu placed a rahui or ban on violence or shooting in the town following an all-out brawl and earlier firearms incidents. As at the weekend, the police say they had arrested 7 people and recovered 4 guns and 250 rounds of ammo. Joining me now is the Police Commissioner, Andrew Costa. Kia ora, Commissioner.
Kia ora, Lisa.
Tell me, how big has this got? How many incidents are you looking at that you think are connected?
Yeah, look, obviously there's in the vicinity of 10 shootings that we've seen, but there are a range of other lower level incidents as well. The key point here is we cannot sustain this kind of violence in our communities, and police is cracking down on these two groups, sending a clear message about the way we need to behave.
When you say things at the lower end, what are you talking about?
Oh, look, a range of interactions. I'm not going to go into fine details on those events, but what I can say is the tensions have been high. Frankly, the issue here is how they behave, and what we're doing there is focusing on the members of these groups, whether it's search warrants, whether it's any avenue we can find to put pressure on and make it clear they need to pull their heads in.
Obviously, these two gangs have had issues with each other for years, right? So what specifically has caused the flare-up right now?
There are a range of theories circulating around that. I can tell you that no reason justifies the kind of violence that we have seen in our communities.
Absolutely, but to understand it, Commissioner, can you give us a bit more detail? What is this? Is this a drug turf war?
I do not have reason to believe that this relates to drugs. I believe it relates to long-running tensions, probably at a personal level between these groups, but I'm not going to go into detail because I only have rumour and speculation on that front.
And why no more detail? Are you unable to get intelligence?
I can't tell you with confidence that the intelligence I have is 100% accurate, so it's not helpful for me to speculate. What I can say is there are long-running tensions between these groups. That's as may be. The behaviour we're seeing has got to stop.
Over the shooting of Josh Masters?
Oh, look, I'm sure that sits there in the background. Obviously it would. But, you know, as I say, none of that justifies the behaviour that we're seeing.
What kind of weapons have they got?
The weapons we've recovered are varied. We recovered, as you noted in your intro, 4 firearms. 2 of those were restricted firearms. We are very concerned about their access to firearms. That's been.
Can you be specific? What restricted firearms have you recovered?
I'm not going to go into too much detail because those cases.
Automatic weapons, Commissioner?
No, not automatic weapons. High-powered weapons, I think, is an accurate description. Yeah.
Those are the ones you've got. Obviously, you would have got casings from the incidents around the place. What other weapons are you looking for?
We're looking for a variety of weapons that would include shotguns and rifles. We have recovered some, but we've no doubt that there are more to be found. We are dealing with the consequences here of decades of lax gun control.
Yeah, so where are they continuing to get the weapons from?
Look, this is the focus of a very big investment that we have received in the budget just gone. We now have the legislation and funding to put in place firearms regulation that will make our communities safe. It's going to take some time for that to have the effect. In the meantime, we invite anyone who has information about firearms that are illegally held to come forward so that we can get those firearms back.
Who's talking directly to the gangs, working on some kind of truce? Who's doing that?
We certainly have been working at that. We recognise that where you have groups at war, then a resolution has to be part of what we try. We recognise it's very difficult with these groups in particular, but that won't stop us attempting it.
Who's doing your negotiations and who are they talking to?
We have anyone who has reasonable contact we would be prepared to work with. We have had some
But right
contact.
now, are you working with someone specifically?
I'm not going to go into the detail of the conversations that we're having, but I can say that we have had direct contact and we have made efforts at bringing about a resolution.
With the leadership of both gangs?
With leaders from both gangs, it's fair to say.
Okay, Operation Cobalt, this operation to target gangs, has it started?
Effectively, it has in Auckland. So the tactics that we're applying to these two groups in Auckland...
Effectively, but not actually, Commissioner? Not officially?
Well, we're building into it, so it's underway in Auckland in terms of targeting these groups. It's going to scale up in Auckland over the coming weeks, and then it will roll out nationally. So it's not a big bang thing here, Lisa. This is about a gradual application of the tactics, and this situation has enabled us to bring those on sooner or triggered us to bring it on sooner.
Commissioner, does this operation get extra resources, or are you just reallocating the resources that you have?
We will have dedicated resources to the operation, but it also draws on a whole of policing approach. So we will be generating intelligence, which will then be tasked out to districts for investigative action. We'll be using road policing enforcement to be able to impact in whatever way we can on unlawful gang behaviour.
Thank you for joining us this evening, Commissioner. That is Andrew Costa, the Police Commissioner there. It is almost 14 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. COVID's crept its way into the Prime Minister's delegation just days before her sit-down meeting with US President Joe Biden. The head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Chris Seed, tested positive in San Francisco and has to isolate there for 5 days. Same goes for the Prime Minister's Chief Press Secretary, Andrew Campbell. Here's political editor Jane Patterson.
So, of course, this trip started off with a COVID complication with the Prime Minister herself testing positive, and that really threw the logistics into a bit of disarray. Her departure was delayed, and then it made it a bit more difficult to actually get that White House visit nailed down. So over the weekend were the last of the formalities, including in San Francisco, where she had a meeting with the California Governor Rick Newsom, and just yesterday it came through that he had caught COVID. He announced on Twitter that he had tested positive the day after Jacinda Ardern and her delegation had met with him. And since then, we have heard this morning, US time, we were told that the head of MFAT, Chris Seed, had tested positive, and he was staying in San Francisco and isolating for about 5 days. At the same time, the Prime Minister's Chief Press Secretary in the same small travelling delegation said he wasn't feeling very well, and he elected to stay in San Francisco and get a test. And by the time we flew over to Washington and landed, the news came through that he had also tested positive. So 2 key members of the Prime Minister's delegation, both now back in San Francisco, isolating ahead of this White House visit, now just about a day and a half away.
So are there any extra measures before the White House meeting as a consequence of this?
So the media delegation and everybody else will have to have a PCR test. Now, I'm not actually sure whether that was going to be a requirement before these positive tests in the Prime Minister's delegation. I imagine that there would have been some kind of testing requirements, but we are late at night now, Washington time, and in the morning, the day ahead of the trip, we will all have to get PCR tests, and none of us will be going to the White House, obviously, if we test positive, and if any of the rest of the delegation, they will still have to isolate. So there are going to be some more hurdles to pass for the delegation to actually go and attend that White House visit. But also the Prime Minister's actual support staff has now shrunk. Instead of Chris Seed, the New Zealand's ambassador to the US, Rosemary Banks, will be there to brief her at the White House in terms of the foreign affairs and diplomatic matters for that trip. But I understand that actually a lot of the work that MFAT would normally do has already been done ahead of the trip and the briefings and that sort of thing. So the role that the ambassador would play would actually be quite a usual role. So everyone really on tenterhooks, because as soon as you get that test, obviously you're out of that visit and out of the trip. So everyone trying to be extremely careful. The Prime Minister herself, of course, already had COVID, so she's at less risk. And the event, for example, with Governor Newsom was all outdoors. So the risk to her is probably less potentially than other members of the delegation, but everyone's masks on, really trying to be incredibly careful ahead of this visit.
And that's RNZ political reporter Jane Patterson. Now, stand by for more regulation at the checkout. The government's announced plans this afternoon to bust up the supermarket duopoly, but has stopped short of forcing the 2 big chains to sell off some of their assets. Supermarkets will voluntarily have to consider giving competitors access to wholesale supply, but the government plans to work on a compulsory system. There'll also be a mandatory code of conduct governing how suppliers are treated, and supermarkets will have to label products with per-unit prices. Well, joining us now is the Commerce and Consumer Affairs Minister, David Clark. Tēnā koe e te minita.
Tēnā koe, Lisa.
Okay, so how much cheaper is it going to make groceries for people, and by when?
Look, we are already seeing the supermarkets make gestures to reduce their prices. They know that the Commerce Commission found that there was about $1 million a day in excess profits that they're taking currently out of the market, and they are responding for now, but we want to make sure that price reductions and competition becomes a permanent feature in the market.
Okay, so they get to voluntarily consider access to wholesale prices from competitors. That's until the end of the year. Then what are you going to do?
Then we're putting in a regulatory regime that will make it happen for them if they haven't struck good faith deals before then. They haven't done that historically in the way that we would have hoped. They've said they want to, so now's their opportunity to do that. If they don't do it themselves, we're going to make sure that it happens regardless.
What evidence are you going to need to see to know that they're towing the line?
Well, ultimately, those are the details that are yet to be worked through, and I've said that I want to have the regime designed by the end of the year, and that is the process from here. It's a very clear signal to them that they've got the opportunity now to strike those deals before we make it mandatory for access.
And if they don't, will you go as far as having like Kiwi Grocer, like Kiwi Bank?
I don't think there's a case for a government-owned wholesaler, but we can regulate the arrangements for access, essentially unlocking the stockroom door to ensure a competitive market. So the opportunity is there for them now to strike those deals in good faith, knowing that regulation is coming.
So they basically have until the end of the year to do that. If they don't do that, then there's going to be some kind of legislative framework, right? So how long will it take you to actually get this up and running if you have to?
Well, as I said, I want to have this in place by the end of the year.
So actually up and running by the end of the year, even if you have to step in?
Yep, I want the framework up and running. We've appointed an interim regulator in the Commerce Commission, so they are already going to be across watching what's happening. They're very familiar now, of course, with the supermarket sector, having done that detailed report on the state of competition. And we've also indicated that we want to set up a permanent regulatory oversight. We've got, as you've detailed, a range of other measures already progressing. The covenants are being rolled back, mandatory code of conduct they've signed up to, and so on.
So why don't you go the full hog and order them to sell off some of their assets? And how likely is it that you would still go down that path?
We certainly have not ruled that out. In fact, we're devoting extra resource to looking into that, retail divestment. What is needed is detailed cost-benefit analysis on that, because we want to be sure that that's the best route to go down.
And when will you have that by, Minister?
I expect to make further announcements on that this year. But I do want to do the proper cost-benefit analysis around it. Maybe that it's better to have small chains expanding rather than giving over store space, but it may be that giving over store space is the best way to get there. We need to do the homework on it.
You said you spoke to the supermarkets this afternoon. Are they scared of you and what's coming?
They're very clear that they need to change. That's a message that they have taken to heart. I think we can see that.
But haven't they said that to you before, Minister?
Oh, and that is exactly why we're pursuing regulatory options. We're not leaving that to chance.
How confident are you that they are going to comply?
Ultimately, if it becomes mandatory, we know that they will, because they won't have a choice. But we're giving them the chance to sort that out for themselves. They have already committed to a mandatory code of conduct, and they're working actively on that. That's at a quite advanced stage. They are already removing the covenants that they had to block competition in different suburbs. They've accepted a regulator over them, and they've made these gestures with price rollbacks. I think we can see they know the tide is turning. But we want to make sure that the right regulatory framework is in place so that there is no option in the future but to do the right thing.
Ngā mihi, Minister. That is the Commerce and Consumer Affairs Minister, David Clark. Kia ora e te iwi. We would love your feedback. Homai o whakaroa. Let us know what you think about the changes coming for the supermarket industry. So stop short there of ordering some of the chains to sell off some of their assets, but they are going to bring in a compulsory mandatory code of conduct, and they're going to have to display prices per unit, so you'll be able to know how much you're paying for 100 grams of this, that, or the like, so that you can better compare prices. Let us know what you think. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us at Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Heaps of options. It is time for the headlines now. Ko Ewe Anō tēnei.
Thanks, Lisa. Right. Headlines. The Police Commissioner Andrew Costa says police are cracking down on the tribesmen and killer bees gangs who are at the centre of rising tensions. He's told Checkpoint that this kind of violence in communities cannot be sustained. The Consumer Affairs Minister, David Clark, claims that changes to the grocery sector will bring down the cost of food. The government is establishing a watchdog and a mandatory code of conduct as it tries to tackle the supermarket duopoly. The Deputy Prime Minister says New Zealand has always been the Pacific's consistent partner. It comes in the wake of a meeting between China's Foreign Minister and Fiji's government in Suva this afternoon, as China seeks to gain more prominence in the region. TVNZ's Head of News admits it's been an unsettling few days for the state broadcaster, with controversy over the resignation of breakfast presenter Kamal Santamaria. After several attempts at claiming the top job at Australia's Liberal Party, Peter Dutton has been chosen to replace the former Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. The ANZ is the latest bank to lift mortgage rates after the Reserve Bank raised the official cash rate last week. ANZ's floating rate will be 5.94% for new loans. And good news for sports fans as the New Zealand Sevens tournament returns to Hamilton next year. And in traffic news, let's take a look at what's happening around the country. State Highway 1 is closed just north of Tokorua following a crash involving two vehicles about 90 minutes ago. Expect delays there. And State Highway 25 in the Coromandel between Whitianga and Kaimarama is closed due to flooding and will probably stay that way for a wee while yet due to the incoming tide. Those are the headlines. We'll update you with the latest news headlines and traffic at around 5:40.
Kia ora rā iho. Checkpoint can reveal it cost taxpayers nearly $10 million to transport returning Kiwis to MIQ facilities after health officials deemed it no longer justified. MIQ was maintained for 3 months despite the Director General of Health Risk Assessment. Kiwis stuck overseas during that time or who paid for MIQ say the figure is a slap in the face. Louise Tanuth reports.
The figures obtained under the Official Information Act show the government spent $9.1 million sending international returnees to 32 different MIQ facilities around the Motu between December last year and February this year. $4.9 million was spent on air transportation and $4.1 million on buses. That's a cost many argue should never have been incurred because a November public health assessment by Dr. Caroline McElnay, signed off by Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, noted that international arrivals did not pose a higher COVID risk. It took another 3.5 months before most travellers could enter the country free of MIQ.
It was an incredibly horrible time. And to hear that they've spent that much money on things is just absolutely insane.
That's Bailey Stewart, who'd been living in Australia for a few years when her mental health took a turn for the worst at the end of last year. She decided to come home to her family in Christchurch, but couldn't get an MIQ spot.
I was at serious risk of being homeless because they had already found someone to fill my apartment. Looking at going into a hotel for an unknown period of time would have cost thousands. Living in Sydney, things are not cheap. So, where is all my stuff going to go? I advised my job that I was moving back to New Zealand.
Bailey finally managed to book a ticket a few days after the bubble reopened in April this year, but says Kiwis should have been trusted to do home quarantine.
If we had been told to stay at home and to quarantine at home, we would have done it. I have a friend that she missed the death of, her mother, all because you don't trust us as Kiwis.
In June last year, Vanya Petkova went to Bulgaria for a month to help her brother who was struggling during the pandemic. It was 6 months before she secured an MIQ spot, completing managed isolation in Christchurch.
It's a lot of money. Really frustrating for me and for many people I know as well. Craziness again. This is just absolutely not fair to the people.
She's still angry at the unnecessary cruelty.
All this uncertainty and many situations which are just so risky, so uncertain, it's been not fair to people. But there was no other way to come to New Zealand.
Auckland barrister Tudor Cleese represented many Kiwis, most of them pregnant, struggling to return to New Zealand during the pandemic.
Right up until even the middle of February,
we had people who were under incredible stress, incredible pain, which impacts directly on the well-being of the baby. So every single day mattered for these people. And to find out that it could have been fixed or at least addressed in some way, perhaps with home isolation 3 months earlier, it's just a real kick in the guts.
He doesn't mince his words at MB's transportation price tag.
Yeah, I think it's an outrageous waste of money that could have been spent on actually helping people who had COVID or needed to recover from it.
He says those who stayed in MIQ during that time shouldn't pay their bill.
People need to put the onus back on the government and say, I'm not paying it. If a debt collector comes, say, I don't accept the bill and you need to justify it. And I don't think people are looking to rip off the taxpayer or to get a free ride, but they're certainly entitled to an explanation and they haven't been given it at this stage.
The government says the extension of MIQ was justified. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says the advice referred to focused on the Delta variant before the more contagious Omicron variant had been classified as a variant of concern by the World Health Organization.
And that was Louise Tanuth reporting. It is 5:28. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National, and it's time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier, who's in the studio. Nona, let's start with the supermarket duopoly, right? And the government announcing what things it's going to do to try and bust that up, and the wholesale market in particular. What are the expectations around whether it's going to improve or not?
Oh, there's big expectations there. So I spoke with one of the larger chains, not a supermarket, of course, Night and Day. There's about 50 or so outlets there, and they've been saying for a long time that they can't compete with the supermarkets because they're having to pay over-the-top prices for wholesale products. In other words, they're basically paying what retail is, and then, of course, trying to make some kind of markup on it. It's just impossible situation. So they're really happy to hear that the government has looked at the Commerce Commission recommendations and then gone a bit harder than what the Commerce Commission was recommending. So they're looking forward to seeing a price reduction in wholesale market for sure, a more competitive level playing field. That's what they're hoping for more than anything.
Okay, interesting. We'll wait and see what happens because they've got until the end of the year to sort themselves out before the mandatory part comes in.
We could go on and on about the problems there.
Okay, aged care and retirement village sector is seeing strong growth. What are the numbers?
Yeah, we had a couple of companies reporting today. One of them is Radius. It's an aged care company. Their I guess it's their full year profit increased 57%. That was a gain of $1 million to $2.7 million. And they've also raised some money there to buy more property, so they're expecting to grow. Arvida, which is a more well-established firm, has been around in business for a while. Their profit was up 42%. Well, it's quite a good deal. And anyway, they're expecting more growth. They've just bought a portfolio, I think, of 6 retirement villages, which boosted their bottom line by $15 million. But they see some concerns ahead, and they're really, really worried about how many nurses they have available. Yeah. One of the things that's going on is there's some negotiation for pay equity, looking at nurses working in the district health boards. They're afraid that once that negotiation is completed, they're going to lose more of their nurses to that.
Because they'll get more pay at the
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the government's saying that they're going to look at the aged care sector and then tackle that next. But they're really worried that in between time, they're going to lose staff. And that's going to be difficult. They're saying that they lost 800 beds in the past year. That's not going to work very well with an aging population.
Wow. And is that due to staff shortages?
Yeah. And well, I guess, and also closures of small facilities that can't scale up. It's quite expensive. And the industry has been complaining for a long time that the cost, that the subsidy that they're getting from the government is not enough to meet the demands of, well, wages and just the care required.
Yeah, okay. Let's have a whiz around the markets.
Yeah, well, interesting. We had a late market update from A2 Milk. So they've applied to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration to ship over some of its premium infant milk formula. There's a critical shortage going on in the United States, and that saw their share price rise 10% today. And that certainly has boosted the market. It finished up 0.75% up. That was an 80-point gain to 11,146. The New Zealand dollar is steady ahead of the U.S. There's a holiday in the United States, Memorial Day. And so that seems that's likely to slow down reaction. But look, the Asian markets took a lead from Wall Street, very positive. So our dollar is steady at 65.5 US cents, 91.2 Australian, and 51.8 pence.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Pautier there with business news. People are getting reinfected with COVID-19, but the ministry is telling people not to bother getting tested again. International cases are suggesting it's becoming more common to get COVID again in your 90-day immunity window. But flu season might be mucking up the numbers. Our reporter, Kirsty Frame, reports.
Wellington resident Esme Putt is back in bed with COVID for the second time. After testing positive in April and returning negative results in between, she got the 2 lines again last week. She says while her symptoms have been milder, she's not feeling well. One thing, however, has stayed the same.
Being really, really, really tired. Like if I get burst with energy back and then I'll do something like I'll try to watch a movie or something like that, and then about halfway through that I'll just feel like tanked on energy again, and that's been really, really similar both times. The tiredness has been really similar.
Getting COVID twice, especially within a 90-day window, is rare, but it can happen. It can also be the case that someone who got COVID once returns a false positive second test and perhaps has the flu instead. That's what makes an official count difficult. Despite Esme recording both her positive results, the Ministry of Health has no way of collecting that crossover. Professor Michael Planck says while there is no clear data right now, reinfections are probably low.
It's possible that we're not seeing many reinfections yet, and that may be because people might not feel like they need to test, if they've had COVID before. But it's quite possible that reinfections are a small fraction of the total number of cases at the moment, but it's likely that will change going forward.
Research is still underway to find out if reinfections result in mild, similar or worse symptoms. Dr. Diane Sika-Paltonu, Associate Pacific Dean for Otago University and immunologist, says it's a new area. One UK study suggests the alpha strain is less severe the second time round.
The reinfections tended to be less severe when compared with the primary infection. However, ongoing work will be needed to understand more about whether reinfections for the Omicron and all its subvariants are more or less severe when compared to the primary infection.
GPs have been noticing more patients anxiously calling up with COVID symptoms again. Dr. Brian Beattie from the Royal New Zealand College of General Practitioners says it's tricky to get an accurate picture.
There's no doubt that some people are definitively getting reinfected. However, I suppose one of the confusing features at the moment is the symptoms of COVID are very similar to the symptoms of other viral illness, such as influenza. So sometimes it's a bit difficult to disentangle what exactly is going on.
The Ministry of Health says people who start getting COVID symptoms within that 90-day window should not get retested because it could be inaccurate. Instead, people who are sick again need to stay at home until they feel better. Their household contacts still have to isolate again unless they've had COVID in the last 90 days. Professor Michael Planck says reinfections are something that will be with us for a while.
There's no guarantee that the severity will go down, but unfortunately I think it is the reality for many people that you will catch COVID multiple times, over a long period of time, over several decades.
The Ministry of Health is currently working on its case recording system so that it can formally collect reinfection numbers.
And time for some of your feedback now. A lot of you getting in touch regarding the supermarkets. Government's announced what recommendations it's going to go ahead with from the Commerce Commission. This person says, how much excess profit is the government making from the supermarkets? As prices go up, GST take must be going up too. Good point. Jim from Papamoa says, not quite on topic, but are we going to start asking about the hardware duopoly between Bunnings and Mitre 10? And another listener, Jeremy, says that these requirements are inadequate. They will continue to rot us for the next decade at this rate. Thanks for your feedback. Do keep it coming. You can reach us by text 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Some Māori can't legally access their own land, and it's preventing them building houses for whānau who want to live there. It comes after RNZ this morning reported barriers at the bank are stopping some Māori building on their land. Here's Alice Stewart.
In rural Hokianga, Luann Butler and her whānau have land surrounded by native bush. It's here they want to build papakainga and live collectively. There's already one whare on the land which belonged to Luann Butler's nanny, but they want to build more. 2.5 years into planning, though, they're stuck because their whenua is landlocked with no legal access.
When whenua is landlocked, you either have to have really good neighbours who will let you drive over their whenua, or you can't actually get to your whenua other than walking. So my nanny, my mum and them, when they were young, they used to have to walk.
Instead of a legal driveway, she says her whānau have an unsafe, rough path tyres have carved out over the years, and it floods any time it rains.
I think that's the same with a lot of rural whenua. It's when it was all divvied up, but they didn't think about how people were going to get to the whenua when there was no road.
Ms Butler says her whānau have to walk 2 kilometres, hauling their bags of groceries just to get to the whenua.
Many years we spent as kids having to walk from the road across the paddock, across the stream and up the hill.
To gain access, owners of landlocked whenua must approach surrounding neighbours to negotiate and formalise reasonable legal access. In cases where they can't come to an agreement, it's off to the Māori Land Court. But it's a long process, and they may be required to pay compensation for access across private land. Past generations in Luann Butler's family didn't have the resources or support to formalise their own road. The whānau are trying to sort it out now, drawing up a master plan and holding hui.
It is a very long process, like, oh my gosh, we've been doing this for so long, what's next? And then there's like a bit of a bump in the road.
Butler's whānau are not the only ones in this situation. According to Te Puni Kōkiri, around 27% of Māori whenua is landlocked. It's the result of many years of extensive subdivision as land was transferred or sold. Whangārei architect and Māori housing advocate Jade Kāke says gaining legal access can be a fraught process.
You need to get a planner involved and a lawyer, and you go to the Māori Land Court as well if it's going through whenua Māori, and it's not that straightforward. You know, you need to get the permission of the landowner, and so if you do it block by block, it can be pretty, a little bit costly, a little bit onerous.
She believes Māori are facing the same barriers to building on Māori land as those identified by an Auditor General report in 2011.
I don't have an exact solution, but I wonder if there might be either some existing powers available or some new legislation that could be in place that would create legal access for these blocks.
The Associate Minister of Housing, Pieni Henare, says the government has already made changes to make it easier for Māori landowners to access and use their whenua. He says he's working with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development to address further barriers for Māori who are looking to build on their whenua. And Te Puni Kōkiri is looking at the issue of landlocked whenua.
Kia ora e te iwi, you are listening to Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. And we would love your feedback, homai o whakaaro. Let us know your thoughts on access to Māori land, changes to rules around supermarkets to get more competition and hopefully lower prices for consumers, and also the ongoing problems with gang violence, particularly in Auckland and Northland. Let us know your thoughts. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time for the headlines. Ko Iwi anō tēnei.
Tēnā koe, Lisa. The police commissioner says a clear message is being sent to gangs about the way they're behaving. Andrew Costa has told Checkpoint that the police are cracking down on the tribesmen and killer bees following a spate of drive-by shootings, particularly in the Auckland region. The Consumer Affairs Minister, David Clark, says the government wants to make sure that supermarket price reductions become a permanent feature of the market. New regulations are being imposed on the sector in an effort to promote more competition. State Highway 1 is closed just north of Tokoroa after a serious crash. Wakakotahi detours are in place, but drivers should expect delays. Bay of Plenty motorists are being told to take extra care on the roads tonight as stormy weather causes surface flooding and topples trees. Meanwhile, contractors have been clearing debris from roads in the Coromandel Peninsula after wind and heavy rain. New statistics show almost 400,000 animals were killed as a result of research, testing and teaching in 2020. A report from the Ministry for Primary Industries details the use of animals in New Zealand. And the Invercargill mayoral race has thrown up another curveball, with Deputy Mayor Nobby Clark now entering the fray. Only last year, Clark said he would quit local politics at October's elections. And we don't have any more traffic news for you except to say that State Highway 25 in the Coromandel between Whitianga and Kaimarama is closed due to flooding and the incoming tide. Those are the headlines. We'll update you with the latest news and weather at 6.
Kia ora rā e hoa. For the second time in a fortnight, US President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden have consoled the community grieving after a mass shooting. First it was Buffalo, where 10 people died inside a supermarket. Today they were in Uvalde, meeting the families of the 19 school children and 2 teachers killed in the Robb Elementary School massacre. It comes as anger mounts over the delayed police response, which saw officers waiting more than an hour before storming the classrooms and killing the gunman. Anna Yali Ruiz is a reporter with local television station KHOU News. She spent the day following the president's visit.
Well, they flew in early this morning. Their first stop was the elementary school today, trying to obviously visit the memorial that continues to grow outside the school. And then they went to Mass, and then after Mass, they met with each family individually. This was a private closed-door meeting, and he met with every grieving family, heard their concerns. Family members tell us, they were crying. They were just sharing a little piece of their loved ones with the president. And so a very emotional meeting for them.
Were they welcomed by the community?
They were welcomed by the community. The community was happy that they were here, but they were also angry because they want change. They want something done. I kept hearing chants of do something, do something. And the president then got up on his car as he was getting in and he said, we will. So I think that's what the community really wants, is actual change that will prevent it from hopefully happening to other families.
So the president has expressed that he wants change, but is that likely? Can he do it?
That's the hard part. I think it's not just up to the president, unfortunately. I think it's also if they can come up with some kind of, it just depends, because everyone has their own, how do I say this, everyone has their own change that they would like to impart. I mean, the governor says it's mental health. Other people say it's not mental health. Other people say it's gun control. So it really depends on who you talk to and if they're willing to go the extra mile to provide mental health, or to also to go the extra mile and do some gun control laws.
So the President and the First Lady met with the families affected in this particular shooting, but who else was there today?
Yeah, lots of people traveled to Texas. One family in particular who traveled was a family from Houston. They actually lost their daughter to gun violence earlier in the year, and so they brought over 2,000 teddy bears because his mother, her name is Arlene Alvarez, she knows the pain of losing a child so tragically, and she just wanted to come and show her support for these families, wanted to bring comfort to these families and hopefully some love to them as they're going through something so terrible and so traumatic.
I heard one person refer to President Biden as the comforter-in-chief because this is the second community he has visited in a matter of weeks that has been affected by a mass shooting. How did he seem?
Yeah, according to the families that we spoke with, they said that he was very compassionate, understood their pain, and, they even said that they shared tears together. And so I do believe that he feels the pain that these families felt.
And Ayali, we have heard about the children who died during this. Are there any other children who remain in hospital or others who are injured and still alive?
Yes, we do know that there are several people that remain hospitalized, injured, and recovering. And we're hoping that as time passes, that we're able to also share their stories of survivors. Even today I spoke with some deputies kind of off camera, and they were sharing how there were deputies who were going in who are deputies and medical professionals and trained, and they were going in and saving as many people as they could, pulling out some of the injured and treating them as they were taking them to the hospital, sometimes even in school buses. And so we're hoping as the days continue to pass, we're able to talk to some of these local heroes and people who did everything they could to help those that were injured.
And that's reporter Anayeli Ruiz speaking from Uvalde. Mid-Canterbury was reeling this time 12 months ago when a 1 in 200-year flood battered the region. It caused widespread damage to farms in the Ashburton district, but urban areas did not go unscathed. The closure of Ashburton's 90-year-old bridge along State Highway 1 also was a logistical nightmare for supply chains and emergency services. 1 year on, Adam Burns visited the district to see how some of the residents are faring.
I'm not going to stop this. It just kept rising. So I thought I need to get things up off the ground. I had motorbikes and all sorts of bits and pieces. So I started trying to, save stuff. And my wife was inside, not really too concerned. And I just yelled out, come and help me, that it's getting really bad.
Damien Periton is grateful to still have a job and a business. But 12 months ago, as an historic rain event bore down on his Hines home and workshop, he felt his future could be in a precarious state. Forced to flee his property through car bonnet-high floodwaters, he returned home the next day to disarray.
You literally feel like you're walking into a war zone, just into your own house. I think it's just the personal side of things. You just feel like it's invaded. It's invaded everything that you own.
The challenges for Mr. Periton continued in the following weeks, which he admits took a toll on his mental health. He says wellbeing support needs greater priority in future.
Everyone's sort of gone, oh, they're okay, they're fine, and forgotten about us, or, I say us as a community, but I think there needs to be more follow-ups later on. It's very easy to forget very quickly if you're not affected.
The week of the floods wreaked havoc, particularly south of Ashburton. The State Highway 1 bridge suffered foundational damage, forcing its temporary closure 2 days after a state of emergency was declared. Underlining the need for improvements to the town's infrastructure, Ashburton District Mayor Neil Brown says the bridge closure created logistical headaches for the small town of Tynwald.
There was no fire over there. If there was a fire, there's no fire engines over there. There's no doctors over there. There's no pharmacy over there. It was a real challenge if we had a medical event to see that someone wasn't seriously hurt.
Plans for a second bridge in Ashburton are continuing to take shape after many years of community calls for another crossing. The Ashburton District Council is near the end of a business case proposal to Waka Kotahi. Community leaders say the government needs to subsidise the project. Councillor Carolyn Cameron says the floods highlighted an urgent need.
I'd be very disappointed, and I think that would be short-sighted of the government of the day not to prioritise the Ashburton Bridge, given that there's no other near alternative for people to cross and move up and down the South Island.
Ashburton Mayor Neil Brown told Morning Report today it was looking positive, following discussions with Finance Minister Grant Robertson last week.
It is 9 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Contractors are clearing debris from roads in the upper North Island that have been walloped by storms today. Some parts of Te Tai Tokerau and Tamaki Makaurau had between 20 and 40 millimetres of rain in an hour this morning. Met Service says there's more messy weather on the way. Sam Ollie reports.
Full drains, wet roads and bleary eyes. 90-year-old Northlander Alf Crescenson lives alone and is hard of hearing, but he woke to the storm.
The vicious winds, small branches and leaves were hitting the house up till about 2 o'clock.
Contractors rushed to clear a fallen tree blocking the road 100 metres away, but he's used to storm damage, having lived in Pārua Bay for 50 years.
Oh, they come up every now and again. You live with them.
One person was saved from rough seas near Waiheke Island about 6:30. This resident near Hekerua Bay says a local man on a paddleboard came to the rescue.
He looked pretty tired and the water's not that warm at the moment, so yeah, it would have been tough.
Police later said the man was in a moderate condition.
Very soon after we got down there, the Westpac helicopter arrived and circled, but by that stage I think the paddleboarder had the guy ashore.
Parts of Coromandel were soaked with 100 millimetres of rain falling just this morning. Civil Defence Controller Gary Towler says there have been slips along the coastal roads. One was closed. And with more rain forecast in the coming days, he's expecting further damage.
Undoubtedly, when there's quite a lot of rain on the Coromandel Peninsula, slips and surface flooding come with it. So, yes, we do expect that to continue, probably through until Thursday.
Met Service meteorologist Lewis Ferris told Midday Report there will be unsettled weather across the country for most of the week.
We will have further rain throughout the week, so it's a good one to keep up to date with the forecast and also keep that umbrella handy.
Met Service expects the weather to be more settled tomorrow, but showers are likely in western parts of the North and South Islands, and severe rainfall is expected in Westland on Wednesday.
Contraceptive injections are being given to Kaimanawa wild horses to curb herd growth and take pressure off the rehoming program. Musters happen every 1 or 2 years to keep numbers in check, with hundreds of horses being found owners. But that's a huge workload for the volunteers and DOC. The Animal Ethics Committee has approved the use of an injectable contraceptive, and about 60 mares have had it already. Joining us now is Sue Rivers from the Kaimanawa Heritage Horses Welfare Trust. Hi, Sue.
G'day.
Is this a bit of a game changer, you reckon?
It's a massive game changer for us and the horses, yes.
How so? Talk me through it.
Our biggest aim was the reduction of the breeding rate. So by reducing the breeding rate, we then are able to reduce the frequency and the necessity for rehoming musters.
On an annual basis, round about how many horses were you having to rehome?
Anywhere from 70 to 150 annually come out.
Wow, how much harder was it getting to find people to take them?
The last couple of years have been incredibly difficult. We only homed 88 horses this year. We were hoping for 150, but, you know, with the things that are going on for everybody, we did better than we were kind of expecting to. So.
Yeah. The contraceptive, talk me through it. How many of the mares will need to be using it? And also in a practical way, I mean, how do you administer it?
As to how many mares, we started with 60 mares, and we will adjust that figure as we go through the following years and assess the results and the efficiency of those drugs before we go too much further into getting too many more mares done.
And so what do? Have to round them up, and do they only have an injection once?
They're rounded up. The mares are drafted off, sedated and vaccinated. That vaccination has an approximate 4-year lifespan. So the plan is that the mares were branded as they were vaccinated. So 4 years from now, they'll be brought in and re-vaccinated and hopefully catch the majority of their breeding lives.
Given that you are now vaccinating some of them, have you worked out how many horses you'll still need to rehome? Will there be some that you do have to find places for still?
We do anticipate it's going to take at least 4 or 5 years to see a big reduction in those numbers. So We do anticipate the next 2 years will be fairly similar as far as rehoming. Then we hope to see a reduction from there. The biggest change we'll see, the majority of rehomed horses will be the younger stock. So that's gonna help alleviate the stress for those older stallions and mares coming out anyway.
So when do you normally do the muster?
Every year around April or May.
And I suppose the other part of it was you were busting the herd up every time, weren't you?
We were, yes, but we were removing entire bands, so we weren't. It's not like we were taking some away and leaving some out there, but they're still getting broken up, unfortunately.
So has this particular contraceptive been used elsewhere? I mean, have you looked to other examples, and how's it gone for them?
Yes, we did it. We first did a contraception program back in the late 90s using PZP, and that wasn't terribly successful. So we haven't wanted to rush into this. Over the last 20 years, we've done extensive research and followed a lot of the progress over the years. So the drug of choice we chose has had really good success in a lot of different animals, but particularly wild horses.
I know that part of the goal is to maintain the herd with as little intervention as possible. I mean, how comfortable are you with this as a solution?
It is a better solution for us long term than rehoming. It's definitely going to remain a complementary option to rehoming, particularly for that next 10 years until we know where we're at with it.
It's going to be even more special to have a Kaimanawa horse then, isn't it, Sue?
It will be. They'll start to become quite exclusive. Based on our projections, we're hoping within 8 to 10 years that we're doing a rehoming muster every 2 to 3 years and only removing 40 or 50 horses. So they will become quite exclusive.
Thank you for joining us, Sue. That is Sue Rivers from the Kaimanawa Trust, Welfare Trust for the horses there. As she said, they've started to give them contraceptives. 60 mares have had the injection, and they're hoping to be able to, have fewer horses that they have to rehome because it's getting a bit tough. To some of your feedback now on the US and gun control, one listener says it's funny that the US president can launch a nuclear weapon but can't change gun laws. On MIQ. Now, this is the news that almost $10 million was spent flying Kiwis around to different MIQ facilities after the Director General of Health said, the facilities weren't necessary. This person says enough of this constant whinging about MIQ. It saved the people of New Zealand. Just because it didn't work out for you doesn't mean it didn't work out for the 99% of New Zealanders that need it to be there. Joe says, I'm so over the bleating of a self-privileged few over MIQ. Has anyone asked Caroline McElnay or Ashley Bloomfield if they ever considered revisiting that recommendation in light of the Omicron outbreak? On the subject of supermarkets, Rehan has got in touch to say, why not ask when GST comes off food, real change for working and poor people? Yeah, and we have asked that before, and we're constantly told it's just too complicated. And others are pointing out other duopolies and monopolies that they would like investigated. Fonterra is one of them. Teagle's another.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. The government is not ruling out forcing the two big supermarkets to sell off assets. A grocery sector watchdog and a mandatory code of conduct is being set up to tackle the duopoly and bring in more competition. Foodstuffs and Countdown will have to open up their wholesale arms to competitors by the end of the year. The Consumer Affairs Minister, David Clark, told Checkpoint making them sell off parts of their retail business is still on the cards.
We certainly have not ruled that out. In fact, we're devoting extra resource to looking into that, retail divestment. What is needed is detailed cost-benefit analysis on that.
David Clark says he wants to be sure that's the best route to go down, and he expects to make further announcements this year. The police commissioner says they're cracking down on two feuding gangs after a series of drive-by shootings. Andrew Costa told Checkpoint the police are putting pressure on the tribesman and its former feeder, the Killer Bees, executing search warrants and making it clear they need to pull their heads in.
There's in the vicinity of 10 shootings that we've seen, but there are a range of other lower level incidents as well. The key point here is we cannot sustain this kind of violence in our communities, and police is cracking down on these two groups.
Andrew Costa says long-running tensions are behind the recent increase in violence between the two gangs. Some Māori can't legally access their own land, and it's preventing them building houses for whānau who want to live there. Te Puni Kōkiri figures show about 27% of Māori whenua is landlocked due to years of extensive subdivision as land was sold. Alice Stewart reports.
To gain access, owners of landlocked whenua must approach surrounding neighbours to negotiate legal access. In cases where they can't come to an agreement, it's off to the Māori Land Court. But Māori housing advocate Jade Kāke says it can be costly and onerous. The Associate Minister of Housing, Pini Hinare, says the government has already made changes to make it easier for Māori landowners to access and use their whenua, and is working to address further barriers.
The government has sought assurances Television New Zealand followed due process when recruiting Kamal Santamaria. TVNZ won't answer questions about the sudden resignation of Mr Santamaria, who quit less than a month after starting as a breakfast presenter. Acting Prime Minister Grant Robertson says the Broadcasting Minister, Chris Whāwhoi, has made inquiries with TVNZ's board. Mr Whāwhoi is still awaiting a response. 14 bodies have been recovered after a plane went missing in Nepal with 22 people on board. The Tara airplane was flying from Pokhara to the popular tourist town Jomsom in central Nepal when it lost contact with air control 12 minutes into the journey. The wreckage was found after 2 days of searching. New statistics show almost 400,000 animals were killed as a result of research, testing and teaching in 2020. The Ministry for Primary Industries annual report shows animal research decreased by 22% compared with the previous year. However, the drop was probably caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, which forced researchers into lockdown. Nearly 250,000 animals were manipulated and almost half were dead or euthanized afterwards. And an additional 150,000 animals were bred for research but not used and were also killed. Contractors have been clearing debris from roads in Coromandel walloped by storms today. Parts of the peninsula were soaked with 100 millimetres of rainfall before lunchtime. Thames Coromandel Civil Defence Controller Gary Towler says there have been slips along the coastal roads, one was closed, and with more rain forecast in the coming days, he's expecting further damage.
Undoubtedly, when there's quite a lot of rain on the Coromandel Peninsula, slips and surface flooding come with it. So, yes, we do expect that to continue probably through until Thursday.
Crews have also been clearing branches on roading in Northland. And Bay of Plenty motorists are being warned to take extra care on the roads tonight due to stormy weather. High winds and heavy rain have caused surface flooding and toppled trees. The police say drivers should delay travel, but if you have to be on the road, please drive with extreme caution. And to sport, the New Zealand Sevens tournament is returning to Hamilton after a 2-year hiatus from the Waikato city. Co-promoter Dallas Fisher says the tournament will be hosted on the new dates of January the 21st and 22nd of next year. He promises the event will be an entertaining weekend and music to the ears of local business.
This is a big event for Hamilton. Economic new cash into Hamilton City of $3.2 million a year. On top of that, the event will spend $2 million on fencing and signs and all that sort of stuff. And on the day of the event, there will be about 1,000 people working in event jobs.
The Black Ferns and All Black Sevens are set to defend their respective titles at the tournament. That's the news.
Kia ora, I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Today on The Detail, they're battling with paper shortages and soaring costs, and it's about to get tougher for New Zealand newspapers. Could communities end up without a local paper?
This is a real concern for me, as you're now potentially depriving communities of what is, I think, quite a critical window into what's going on in their community.
The Detail on Apple, Spotify, RNZ or wherever you get your podcasts.
You're back on Checkpoint with Lisa Owen next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. For Northland and Auckland, showers with thunderstorms and hail possible, clearing this evening. Rain developing tomorrow evening with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms in Northland. From Waikato to Taranaki, including Taumaru Nui, also Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Rain with thunderstorms, hail and localised downpours possible, turning to showers tonight and clearing tomorrow afternoon. Rain developing tomorrow night. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, occasional rain clearing tonight, fine tomorrow. From Whanganui to Wellington, including Taihape, Wairarapa, Marlborough and Nelson. Periods of rain turning to showers this evening, but becoming fine about the Kaikoura coast. Showers clearing from Wellington northwards tomorrow and rain developing elsewhere at night. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain heavy at times, easing to a few showers for a time tomorrow. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, areas of low cloud or fog about the coast, clearing overnight. Scattered rain developing tomorrow night, and for the Chatham Islands, cloudy, occasional rain tomorrow. The time is 6 minutes past 6. I'll update you with the latest news headlines at 6:30.
Ngā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The National Party has held its lead over Labour in the latest One News Kantar poll. It seems Labour's big budget announcement last week hasn't convinced voters. They've dropped 2% to sit on 35%. National's popularity remains unchanged. It's still at 39%. As for the Namaina parties, the Greens are on 10%, ACT on 7% and Te Pāti Māori on 2%. But Jacinda Ardern remains in the lead for preferred Prime Minister. She's up on 33%, but Christopher Luxon remains behind her on 25%. Our Deputy Political Editor Craig McCulloch joins us now from the Parliament studio. Well, on first blush, the trend is not Labour's friend, is it, Craig?
No, this just bakes in that trend, doesn't it? Labour would have been hoping for a bump from that budget, but it has been taking a hammering by this cost of living crisis, the sky-high inflation eating away at its population, at its popularity. Rather, this $350 payment that was announced in the budget, it was directly aimed at middle New Zealand, at those voters that they were worried were turning away from Labour, and they were hoping that this might bring some of them back. It has not worked that way, and Labour will be very disappointed it has not given them the lift that they were after. We know too that Treasury is forecasting inflation to continue for another several years yet, which will only add pressure to Labour, not dropping back below 3% for several years yet. And that is a really big problem for Labour. If these numbers don't turn around, if it doesn't start becoming easier for New Zealand families, the government points to overseas international pressures, but this is hurting New Zealanders at home, and they are expecting the government to do something about it. $350 clearly isn't enough. It didn't do it. Labour will have to find something else to win them back.
So, Craig, just an admin thing, over what period was this taken? So smack dab while the budget was being rolled out?
The poll was taken over basically last week. It comes after the budget, but also wraps in the first few days of the Prime Minister's trip. So it really should capture that reaction to the budget. Like I say, it hasn't worked to bring them up in the polls. Here's how you know Labour is worried. They put out an attack ad today directly targeting Christopher Luxon. This is the second year of a second-term government. That's not usually the time that a government rolls out attack ads against the opposition party and the opposition party leader directly. They never did that for Judith Collins. That's because they weren't worried about Judith Collins. They are worried about Christopher Luxon.
Yeah, so in the preferred Prime Minister stakes, while the Prime Minister is still up on 33% and ahead, Christopher Luxon, in essence, is nipping at her heels, isn't he, on 25%, given how every other, and there's been a few of them, national leader has rated.
In the 20s, that is a good number for an opposition leader. Look, Christopher Luxon has been carrying on as he started, relentlessly focused on that cost of living, on inflation, on the economy, hitting the government where he knows that it is hurting them. Now, there have been a few hiccups along the way. There have been a few minor problems, but no major gaffes. And as long as he carries on that way, he is seeming to be able to eat back into that middle voter, those centre voters, those who weren't interested in Judith Collins or Todd Muller or even Simon Bridges. They are interested in Christopher Luxon. Now, the biggest problem for National at the moment, though, is that it needs friends, and it only has ACT. It only has ACT, and at the moment, on these numbers, that's not enough.
Yeah, and let's talk through that in a bit more detail, Craig, because it is tight when the sides line up. Both sides need Te Pāti Māori, don't they?
That's right, and when it comes to the Māori Party, you could probably say, and up until now, you've been counting them in the left ledger. You've been saying, look, the party's membership, the caucus, they all remember what happened the last time that the Māori Party went with National. They were punished in the polls, and it almost decimated the party. Well, in fact, it did. It kicked them out of Parliament altogether, and it did a lot of damage to their credibility. They will be loath to repeat that mistake. However, and that's further underlined, I guess, by their refusal to work with ACT. They've been very clear on that they would not work with ACT in government. National needs ACT to have even a remote chance of getting in. That said, on these numbers, if they went with the left, that's not enough either. Only 60 votes, only 60 seats rather. And that means the prospect of a hung parliament comes into play. Who knows how that would influence various players and their thinking. No party wants to be the one that's responsible for a repeat election where voters might punish them even more in that scenario.
Okay, let's talk about one of the minors, right? And Greens. It's only a 1% bump, but we're talking about the fact that Labor hasn't really been rewarded in the polls for its budget. Are the Greens being rewarded for their policy that came through in the budget?
It's somewhat surprising to a degree, given that the Green Party have not had a huge amount of coverage this term. They have not been spending a lot of time in the headlines, and for a government for a party that has spent a term in government, James Shaw likes to point out repeatedly that no other party has done what the Green Party did, go into government and then come back into Parliament the following term. The Greens have done it, and they seem to have stabilised around that 10% mark, staying steady, and they will be very happy with that, to not be eating away. Now, potentially the focus in recent time on climate change maybe has given the Green Party a bit more profile. It's given James Shaw in particular a bit more profile, and perhaps that's what's showing through here in the polls.
Interesting to talk, Craig. That's Craig McCulloch, our Deputy Political Editor there. It is almost 13 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The US Justice Department will investigate the police response to the mass shooting at a primary school in Texas, in which 19 children and 2 teachers were killed. Public anger has grown after it emerged officers remained in the hallway as children were trapped in the classroom with the gunman. It comes as President Joe Biden visited the town of Uvalde and met with the families of those killed. The BBC's Barbara Plett-Usher reports.
This is the hardest visit a president has to make, especially when the victims are so young. Mr. Biden and his wife Jill joined the mourning of a devastated community, pausing to recognize each of those murdered at this school, 19 children and 2 teachers. The president draws on his personal history in these moments of public grief because he's lost 2 children of his own. A bouquet of flowers added to the mound of remembrance that seeks to dampen the horror by honoring the dead. The rampage began when the teenage gunman entered the school through a back door, armed with a high-power rifle. Children as young as 8 were trapped with him for an hour before security forces finally stormed in. The Justice Department announced today it would review the police response. Mr. Biden went on to meet privately with the families of victims. He also attended a church service. As he left, the crowd outside called for action. But this is a difficult political environment. There's a fierce debate about how to stop such attacks. The president wants to tighten gun laws and faces strong partisan opposition. Especially in Texas. This is, after all, gun country. There are mixed feelings about Mr. Biden's visit.
I don't know if it can make any difference, actually. I think that as a nation, we're just very divided. But I think that, in a time of crisis, it's great for leaders to show unity.
We just need to grieve. We just come here and give us hope for tomorrow, but don't tell us politically what we need to do.
Most of all, the families did not want their pain to be drawn into the political disputes. Patricia Castanon is lost in a fog of grief at the death of her niece Annabelle.
She was happy, smiley. This is how she was with me. There's no words for me to say. She was just a good person.
We know that the president is coming to visit. Do you think that will help?
No.
Why do you say that?
Because he can't bring her back. He can't bring her back. He can't bring none of them back. And nobody can.
He can't bring them back, and he's struggling to protect others. His biggest obstacle is how to prevent this from happening again.
A speeding driverless car with a brick weighing down the accelerator has smashed into other parked vehicles in Christchurch and has residents fearing someone could be seriously hurt if it happens again. In 2 separate incidents, stolen empty cars were found crashed in the city yesterday morning. One that had a brick holding down the accelerator crashed into parked cars in Mount Pleasant shortly after the first incident. Waikura Linwood Central Heathcote Community Board Chairperson Alexandra David says it's a big worry for the community.
I think it's left everybody really shaken. A lot of people are kind of, worried about being asleep at night. Obviously, we're not expecting anything to happen again, but the fact that it has happened definitely leaves people very shaken.
Alexandra, as far as you know, did more than one vehicle have a brick put on its accelerator?
I'm unsure about the one that was in Ferrymead, but there was definitely one in the Mount Pleasant area.
And I understand one of your friends inadvertently had a vehicle caught up in it. Is that right?
Yes. So obviously the repercussions of that is a lot of work with insurance companies after the fact as well. But I think mainly it's that worry around the potential loss of life that could have occurred on that evening. So, it was very close to bedrooms where children were sleeping. And if you're obviously just aiming a car at wherever, cars can bounce off other cars and it could have gone through somebody's wall. So we're very thankful that obviously that didn't happen on that evening.
Where did it end up and how far do you reckon it travelled?
From what I've been told, it travelled around 30 metres. So it hit the cars at very high speeds. So the actual cars that were hit travelled approximately 30 metres down the road. So I think that shows the speed at which the unmanned car was travelling. That's a really huge distance to be pushing cars that obviously have handbrakes on as well. So, pretty extreme.
And were they residents' vehicles in a parking lot, or were they just on the side of the road?
Yeah, residents' vehicles are on the side of the road. Yeah.
So what are police telling you about this and who might be responsible?
Police do have a apparent good idea of who they think it might be. It does involve youth if they are correct in their thinking, which I think is really sad, but also very worrying. I think we're seeing not just in Christchurch, but around the country, a kind of spat of youth picking up vehicles and not doing the best things with them. They shouldn't even be driving them. And unfortunately, there seems to be a bit of a trend at the moment. So whilst we're out there educating people around this, it is quite worrying that perhaps we could see more youths that are kind of being like copycat criminals.
Yeah, what's your biggest concern here?
Mine is really that whole copycat factor. You do have younger people that can be influenced by things that they're reading or watching and perhaps don't have the life skills or the support from people around them to actually educate them in the fact that this is something that you don't do and the dangers of those actions. So mine is really the worry around that, and what are we going to do as a community to help prevent that in the future. And I think that's going to take a multi-agency approach with obviously schools involved, with police, but also whānau at home. It's going to take a bit of work, I think, for us to actually jump on this one and make sure that we are seeing less or ideally nothing, no more of these incidents happening.
Alexandra Davids there. The HSBC New Zealand Sevens tournament is returning to Hamilton after a 2-year hiatus from the Waikato city. It was first hosted there in 2018 after attendances in Wellington declined, but COVID stopped it in its tracks. That's until now, with both the men's and women's tournaments returning in January next year. Here's Waikato reporter Leah Tebbit.
A song to celebrate the return of the Sevens. Co-promoter of the Hamilton tournament, Dallas Fisher's message was loud and clear.
Save that date, put it in your calendar now. It has moved a week. It's a week earlier than last year, so we're not in Auckland anniversary weekend. So you don't have to go to Whangamata. You come to the Sevens, right?
The new dates are January 21st and 22nd. Mr Fisher promises the event will be the most entertaining weekend on the summer events calendar, which will be music to the ears of local businesses.
This is a big event for Hamilton. Economic new cash into Hamilton City of $3.2 million a year. On top of that, the event will spend $2 million on fencing and signs and all that sort of stuff. And on the day of the event, there will be about 1,000 people working in event jobs.
The Sevens return means even more to Black Ferns player Jasmine Felix Hotham. One of the youngest members in the squad at just 21, this will be her first opportunity to play on her home turf.
The Hamilton Sevens is a really significant event on the family calendar. For me to be able to put on the black jersey in front of all those people that have supported me along my journey is truly a dream come true.
Both the Black Fern Sevens and All Black Sevens will be out to defend their respective titles when fans pile into FMG Waikato Stadium next year. Hamilton Mayor Paula Southgate says if they do win, it will make the party event even sweeter.
Does Hamilton know how to party? Of course Hamilton knows how to party. Events like this are not just about players anymore, they're actually about the whole package and the whole community. We're going to have people stay in our city, they're going to eat in our restaurants, they're going to support our local retailers. And that is especially important because hospitality has been doing it hard.
The only question that remains is, will the Sevens fixture be here to stay? New Zealand Rugby's Cameron Good says he's waiting to hear from World Rugby on their plans moving forward.
We're committed to keeping a tournament in New Zealand. We want to retain it. We want when our team's playing at home. So with New Zealand, Fiji, Samoa, Tonga being such, I guess, so high profile on the series, we think it's an added reason why we need that tournament here.
World Rugby is set to announce the full 2023 HSBC World Rugby 7 Series schedule in coming days.
Amsterdam's mayor is pushing ahead with plans to ban tourists from the city's approximately 168 cafes that legally sell cannabis. It's part of an effort to rebrand the Dutch capital, famous for its red light district and coffee shops, as well as stunning architecture and vibrant art scene. The BBC's Anna Holligan reports.
Tulips sway in rainbow displays, cyclists swerve, oblivious tourists outside the Rijksmuseum. This is the side of the city the council wants you to see. Amsterdam's mayor, Femke Halsema, is trying to deter people drawn in by the other things like sex and drugs. Here, these attractions exist side by side. Just around the corner, women strike provocative poses in red-lit rooms. The local authorities blame the red light district and cannabis cafes for attracting the foreign visitors responsible for the antisocial behaviour that's forcing families like the Vissers to consider moving out of their canal-side homes.
There are days that it's too crowded. I can't even get through there by my bike.
This is Micah.
You get more people who have been or visited the coffee shop when it's nice weather and you just smell because the smell comes in the house.
Mark Visser says it's not the dope smokers but binge drinkers who cause the real nuisance.
They get noisy and they are getting aggressive. People go to a coffee shop, smoke hashish and get stoned and are most of the times relaxed.
People caught drinking on the street in Amsterdam can now be fined €95. Their niece, Laura, is visiting from Austria.
I come to Amsterdam because I like the food, I like the museums, I like walking around, I like sitting here and watching people walk by, and I'm not coming for the drugs. And this is something that's weird when I tell my friends at home.
This week will see the start of 4 days of celebrations in the UK to mark the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, marking her 70 years on the throne. During that time, fundamental aspects of life in the UK have changed beyond recognition. The BBC's Mark Easton has more on the Queen's own reaction to the enormous changes she's seen.
Will you solemnly promise and swear?
Along with a crimson velvet mantle edged with ermine, huge responsibility was placed upon the young Queen's shoulders at her coronation in 1953. She was presented to the world as a new beginning for an impoverished kingdom and its crumbling empire. Some people have expressed the hope that my reign may mark a new Elizabethan age, the Queen said in her Christmas Day address later that year. It was from Elizabeth I, who may well have pondered her own destiny in this room in Hampton Court, that Elizabeth II sought inspiration.
I will call to your minds the words of the earlier Elizabeth. Though God hath raised me high, yet this I count the glory of my crown, that I have reigned with your love.
So how did she approach the job? Her answer? To guide this kingdom through changing times, a vital part of what she called a trusted framework of stability and continuity to ease the process of change. The most immediate challenge was helping the country adapt to the end of empire during a time of post-war economic hardship.
No longer an imperial power, we have been coming to terms with what this means for ourselves and for our relations with the rest of the world.
It was also a time of change and tension as immigrants arrived from Britain's colonies. Elizabeth described the new Commonwealth as an equal partnership of nations and races, pledging to give the institution her heart and soul every day of her life. The Queen has often reflected on the enormous social and political change that has characterised her reign. In the swinging 60s, she reflected on how good it was that women were beginning to play their full part in public life. In the strife of the 70s, she spoke of hope and faith, and above all, the values and principles she believed would see us through the toughest of times.
The traditional values etched across our history equip us well for this age of change.
To ease the process of change, Queen Elizabeth II has sought to bring constancy to her role as monarch, dependable, unchanging, loyal and true. As the United Kingdom celebrates her 70 years on the throne, she's become the keystone in the nation's architecture, the solid and immovable piece that holds the country's image of itself in place.
Change has become a constant. Managing it has become an expanding discipline. The way we embrace it defines our future.
If success to Elizabeth was to have reigned with the love of her people as Elizabeth I inspired her to do, then success it has been. Transcending ages, races and classes, Elizabeth can be confident she enjoys the respect and affection of her kingdom.
Some of your feedback before we head off, you're getting in touch about the supermarkets. This person says, while we're at it, isn't it time the supermarkets lead us to reduce carbon by transparently labelling the kilometres of food has travelled to the shelf? That's from Valerie in Christchurch. Glenn's got in touch to say, I worked out by the time I have cooked my daughter her eggs in the morning, made her lunch and a piece of toast for me, I have used 75 cents worth of butter. Surely not in a country with the most dairy production per capita in the world. Something has to change, says Glenn. That's a very accurate calculation. 75 cents worth of butter. How many teaspoons is that? Now, if you have missed anything on the program, don't forget you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Our late news team's going to keep you updated throughout the evening. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō, and tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up, looks at the new rules for supermarkets and asks if they go far enough. Kei te hoki mai anō a pōpō whānau pō Mārie. We'll catch you again tomorrow. Have a great evening.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The National Party is steady on 39 points and the Labour Party is down 2 points to 35 points in the latest One News Kantar public poll. The government isn't ruling out forcing the two big supermarkets to sell off assets as it adopts almost all of the Commerce Commission's recommendations to improve competition. The Police Commissioner is worried that gangs have access to high-powered firearms as police crack down on the tribesmen and killer bees gangs. And there have been several crashes around the country as stormy weather sweeps through. Those are the headlines. Our next news